CCCR, or Centre for Creative and Cultural Research, investigates the ancient, innovative relationship between social culture and creative production. Based in the Faculty of Arts and Design at the University of Canberra, we generate scholarship and artwork in a wide array of humanities, social science, applied and creative disciplines. You are listening to a fresh presentation from the CCCR's Culture and Creativity Seminar Series. To learn more about the Centre's work, please follow the links in the program notes. This podcast was recorded on the unceded lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples. Hi everybody, my name's Paul McGee. I'm the Director of the Centre for Creative and Cultural Research here at the University of Canberra. Lovely to see you all today. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we are on the unceded lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people. Pay my respects to all elders, past and present, and to all First Nations people here today in the room or online. Now, we're going to start with an advertisement before we move to the main fare of today's proceedings. And this is a talk that is on tomorrow. We've been very lucky in managing to get David Willis, who is a professor of French studies at Brown University, well known for his work on technicity and also as a translator of Jacques Derrida. He's done the most recent translation of Derrida's book that I think in French is Glas, and at any rate, in David's English is Clang. So this is a talk in this room, 12:30 tomorrow, and it's on the Rothko Chapel. And it's on what's inside those bricks. It should be pretty extraordinary. I'll also just put up one other event that's coinciding with David's visit. This is at Manning Clark House, 6 p.m. tomorrow night. If you want to hear him in conversation with Nicole Anderson, Professor of Philosophy at the University of Macquarie, that will be a pretty special event. It does cost. It's $20 for waged and $15 for concession. But it will be also a great thing. Whereas our seminar is free. And you can attend ours online as well. Okay. If you need those details again, just come up to me after this talk and I'll provide them again. Okay, so it's my great pleasure today to introduce Rahmatollah Amirjani and Milica Muminovic. So Rom is a lecturer in architecture here in the School of Design and Built Environment. With a focus on the dichotomy between tradition and modernity, Rom's research examines recent developments in housing provision in Australia, as well as in developing countries, investigating the impacts of inappropriate housing policies and design approaches on communities. Milica is a senior lecturer in architecture, here also in the School of Design and Built Environment. Her research focuses on capturing and understanding the complex aspects of the built environment transformations that maintain place identities. Taking a case study approach coupled with lived experience from Europe to Southeast Asia, with a focus on Japan and interdisciplinary collaboration, Milica aims to understand ways of mapping slippery and hard to measure aspects of the built environment. Please join me in welcoming them both to the podium.
Thanks, everybody. Good afternoon. Thanks for coming. I know it's week 13. It's a busy week for our colleagues dealing with so much marking, and also I can see a good number of students. So good luck with your submission as well. So we're really excited to share the initial findings of this research that we introduced almost 2 years ago, which is about just generating a rating system to measure the social sustainability in high-dense projects mainly. And I should acknowledge that this project also received a cross-faculty grant by DVCR and E almost 2 years ago. So it's a result of the collaboration between the Faculty of Arts and Design and Health, and from Faculty of Health, Susan Carroll was a collaborator. So I really appreciate her contribution to this research. So, okay. To the next one, it's just, yeah, all right, this is how I should do it. So what is social sustainability? So mainly it's more about the capacity of built environment, and in this particular case, Hayden's projects to embrace and to foster social interaction, community interaction, sense of belonging, safety, and long-term well-being of residents through the design and governance structure as well. So why social sustainability and why we thought about this project? I think we both had our personal reasons and experiences to seriously think about this project and why a rating system is needed. Like personally, I've arrived in Australia in 2016, and since that time, I have been living in different Hayden's projects across Canberra with different qualities, and I could see how they are performing in terms of socio-cultural aspects. And it's still after 5 or 6 years, I don't know my neighbors, and I'm still living in one of those Hayden's projects just close to here. But again, the main intention is to understand how our Hayden's housing projects are performing from sociocultural aspects, because we know that your living environment would greatly impact your mental and also psychological health and also your physical health as well. And we know in Canberra, there is this rapid growth of high-dense residential projects, and there's this uh, uh, rapid urban density. High-density projects are emerging, in particular in our new towns. So we should make sure about their socio-cultural impact on the residents as well. So we know that by 2030, 26,000 new housing properties are expected to join the market, and 90% of them would be high density. So again, just making sure about their sociocultural impact of those projects are really something that we need to look at. Um, we know that also Canberra has the highest rate of isolation and depression. And on the other hand, we know that from different surveys and data, almost 90% of people who are living in apartment units in ACT, they reported a sort of low um, social connection. So a majority of current housing projects, they are not performing well in terms of socio-cultural aspect, and they are contributing to that rate of isolation as well. Um, so we should think about what I call the social cost of our new development and the impact of our developments of people. And we should ask ourselves, are we built for profit or for the community well-being? And this question is not new, as we all know. And by and large, when we look at what we are offering in what we are offering when we are looking at the new developments that they are coming or the existing market, the answer is clear. Just when we are looking at this plan, which is coming from one of the recent developments, and is not far away from here, you can see just the housing fundamentals are missing. You can see there are some bedrooms that they're not going to get any sort of direct sunlight or cross ventilation. All of those housing fundamentals are missing. So forget about even social sustainability. So we are dealing with much more bigger problem in Canberra. And this sort of social complexity is social sustainability is a complex issue, and maintaining that is also really complex, because when you talk to some architects and also developers, they would reduce the meaning of social sustainability to just providing some common rooms and gym facilities in the housing projects, which the meaning of it is beyond that. And also, we have this notion of First Nation Australians and the notion of country. And we know from the data that the current high dense projects and even medium dense projects are not responding to their needs. In particular, when we are looking at the socio-cultural performance of these projects, we know that only 16% of First Nation Australians that are living in our high dense projects in Canberra. And when we are looking at the new towns like Belconnen and Woden, it's just about 1.6 or 7% of First Nations that are living there. So when you look at the surveys, different data, that sort of this rate of dissatisfaction is really high when we are looking at First Nation Australians, and also multiculturalism. And if what we are proposing, they are responding to different groups from different backgrounds. That's another question that we need to maybe look at. And also, diversity is another aspect that we need to consider, because when we are looking at our high density projects, we mainly see young adults over there, barely with kids, but so you can see a sort of absence of elderly people and other groups. So in terms of inclusiveness, there's also another question there. So and there are other things involved with that to me, like that sort of Canberra as a young capital, which sometimes we cannot call it the city, or the architectural identity, the question of that, and highest level of isolation that I talked about. So I should acknowledge that, okay, we have different good rating systems to measure the energy efficiency of our developments. But obviously, we don't have a solid rating system to measure the social aspects of the high dense and medium dense projects. We do have some rating systems like Green Star that would look at a couple of aspects of social sustainability or social aspects of housing, but not looking at social sustainability as a whole. And that rating system is not mandatory. And obviously, you can see our developers barely they use Green Star to show how their projects are performing in terms of social aspects. Um, and this absence of social sustainability has damaged all groups. It's not just about people that are living in the current high dense projects. Even when you look at our public housing projects or affordable housing projects, they are also suffering from this absence of social sustainability. Just 10 minutes walk from here, you can find some housing projects that they are a total, when you look at the result, it's just a total disaster. It's like a war zone if you go there. And obviously, this absence of social sustainability has made a crime hub in some of those projects. And you can see like every week there's a sort of news about what is happening in those projects, and you can see there's this lack of consideration of social factors, social cultural factors in those projects. um, so I should also mention that this absence has made a stigma. And if you are living in an apartment, you may sometimes question yourself that am I a successful person or not? And actually, that came up in our interviews with residents that, hey, my friends, they are not considering me as a successful person because I'm just a tenant living in one of these new developments. And even it's very interesting that they were talking about how that has impacted their dating, which is really interesting, but that's actually a fact. So so there's a undeniable stigma about living in those high dense projects, and living in high density has had this negative effect on people. And if I go to new slides, this stigma about living in medium density and high density has been there in Canberra from a post-war period when we started to experience a rapid growth of medium and high dense projects. And it's very interesting to see that when a National Capital Development Commission was active from 1958 to 1989, there was this attention to this stigma and to the notion of community. And the decision makers, when you look at the literature, they try to respond to that. And you can see a sort of handpicked architects, I should say, that at that time that they responded to this notion of stigma and the complexity around the social aspects of high density projects using different design strategies. And it is at that time we can see a sort of the emergence of a common room and common rooms, and also gathering areas outside of those new developments that they were happening in the post-war period under NCDC as well. And there are some very interesting projects that you can have a look, like Swinger Hill is another notable one that it's very performing well in terms of socio-cultural aspects. And also you can see that every 2 years, NCDC would run a survey. They would survey the tenants to understand how they are traveling in terms of living in those medium density and high dense projects, and they would ask them different questions like, hey, why you like living here? Is it because of affordability, or are you planning to leave this residence soon? What's the reason you are leaving? Are you going to come back? So there are all these questions to understand what's going on and the rate of satisfaction in those projects. And also, I should quickly mention that this notion of social cost of housing uh, and social aspects of housing and looking at it in a medium dense and high dense is not something new. Even when you go back to 19th century industrialization and the beginning of mass production, you can see some of those key leaders at that time, they were talking about how social interaction and social engagement and community engagement can increase the rate of satisfaction, and how it's going to impact the psychological well-being of residents, which is really interesting. And they went even at that time beyond just communal spaces or shared spaces, and there was this emphasis on proposing social programs for each complexes, and how we can increase the social the interaction between residents beyond just provision of communal gathering areas or those sort of things. And I really encourage everybody to look at the work of Robert Owens in 19th century, and he was a key player behind many interesting concepts at that time for increasing that social interaction between people, like collective gardening, collective cooking, free nursery, and also learning classes from the residents. Very interesting when you look at how they approach this notion of social sustainability at that time. Um, and also later, we know that in the mid 20th century, when we're looking at, there are some key players that they look at social sustainability, or better to say, they look at housing as a social project. In particular, when we are looking at the works of Allison and Peter Smithson and their critique about other modernist architects, they talked about how the housing projects could be different at that time. So it's very interesting. So it's not something new that we are talking about. And there's this recent attention of ACT government to this notion of social sustainability, social resilience. And when you look at the new design guides that they came out 2 years ago, you can see a sort of little transformation. There's really a good attention to these social aspects. But when you look at their suggested criteria or elements, they are not that explicit. There are no design guides over there. There's some generic decisions or suggestions that you can have a local architects they can consider. Um, so why is social sustainability often overlooked despite the strong historical and theoretical discussions that I mentioned from the beginning of this presentation? There are obviously different reasons for that. The weak planning and statutory requirement is one of them, and to us, this absence of a solid rating system is another issue. Commodification, the power lobby of developers, knowledge of the key players. When you look at the key players behind those design guides, and also about the new developments, is very interesting when you look at their backgrounds. Pedagogy and shift in the discourse of architecture is another reason, and knowledge of also graduates that they are going to be the key players in the housing development, in particular in Canberra. So there are multi-factor things involved with this absence and lack of social sustainability that we are talking about. So what we are talking about, so we are saying, okay, the rating system should be imposed, and we are looking at rating system as a barrier. So we have a couple of barriers, let's say, or we have planning and design regulation as one barrier. We have the certifiers, if they can talk about the social sustainability, as another sort of barrier, and then a rating system. Because if we have this label for any residential complexes, in Canberra, for example, they know what they are going to buy. And if the rating is low, maybe they're not gonna buy that, or they're not gonna go into those complexes. And that would increase the competition between, I think, developers and the builders to just generate something that is also socio-culturally responsive as well. So this is our argument at the moment. Um, so again, a redefinition of social sustainability is needed, and a mandatory rating system is needed. So this is a sort of fundamental of how we started this project and what's the argument at the moment. And my colleague Melissa would continue the discussion.
Great, thanks, Ram. So the idea is that, of course, when we look at social sustainability, there are some things that we already know, but there are also some things that are fairly local and quite based in culture. And of course, there is also a level of complexity that I'm very much involved and interested in this project, which involves this whole idea of measurability of that, but we'll get to that. So today we're presenting parts of the findings that we've already done. As Ron mentioned, the project started in 2024.
Official.
And we've done an extensive literature review to cover all the aspects around social sustainability. We've done a number of interviews with residents here in Canberra. And then we've also consulted practitioners who are involved in designing. So that would be our third phase, designing. We're still going with that process. And then we do also have some other phases involved. So we're also having experts survey as well. So there are a number of social toolkits that already kind of exist that we can find overseas as well as here that talk about parts of social sustainability, but most of them very much focus on social aspects, ignoring a little bit built environment as well. And how do we actually start understanding this is where my personal interests lie in this project. And I'm really grateful for Rom inviting me to this project, is actually thinking about how these components or dimensions of social sustainability interact. We can definitely say that we could divide some of these components into intangible as well as tangible, and we can start seeing how they overlap as well as they're also interdependent. So some of these kind of notions of social cohesion, which is very much interested in strength of the relationships within community, as well as this sense of solidarity between community, or there are other aspects around social capital, very much related to disaster recovery policies, where they talk about networks of trust within community as well as community resilience. There are well-being aspects that are involved within this as well. And we can dedicate, I think, the whole one session or a day discussing a definition of well-being, but in general, talking about mental health, social connections, as well as life satisfactions, sustainable communities. Ron mentioned that Green Star actually defines sustainable communities as communities that actually embed within themselves sustainability or sustainable development. But what they're looking at is more or less development of community and personal development as well, rather than completely these aspects. And then what we really want to introduce is all these tangible aspects that we can see in built environment and how they connect in terms of, for example, accessibility, as we know, to public transport, attractive shared spaces, quality and amenity of shared spaces, pollution and waste management, building management, but also not just shared spaces. We know that social sustainability starts with your private space. So thinking about how those internal private spaces link, as we call here, decent housing, mixed use, architectural identity, incorporations of multiple communities or cultures, First Nations, privacy, density, and many, many others, which is quite interesting. So starting with interviews, we've done 21 interviews, which were semi-structured, involved around 45 minutes to an hour discussion with various people living in different projects or different buildings here around Canberra, different densities as well. So we had what we call here missing middle, which is actually a low density, which are some of those massive townhouse projects, as well as higher density that Ron was showing in our town centres. And we've covered different groups of people. We're kind of missing people, retired people above 65. We couldn't reach to them. Which is, again, they're also underrepresented in this project. And as you can see, we're actually focusing on those new developments or newer developments rather than some of the old ones that Ron was showing, because we do have some really great examples, especially from early NCDC era and especially 70s. But we're really looking into these newer developments, Belconnen, Woden, very much represented, as well as Civic. This is just a snapshot of the frequency of keywords that were distilled from those conversations that we had or interviews in different groups. So the top left here, you can see these are under 19. So we had some younger residents. They're very much focused on their family as well as the ground floor and how that's negotiated, which is really interesting. I forgot to mention that our interviews were divided into really two parts. The first part was really extensively understanding the background of the person that we were talking, where they live, how they live, what they think about their community, how community works, etc. And the second part was really going through what we found in terms of criteria, in terms of social sustainability, and asking them to give us a comment or what they think contributes or doesn't contribute. And then asking them to add some other comments that maybe we didn't, criteria that maybe we didn't consider. So from these interviews, so that's kids or adolescents. Then we had young adults until 24 years old. They're really interested in promoting sustainability, which is quite interesting to us. Again, they're interested with the ground floor, and I think that's across all of the groups, which is quite interesting to me as well, as Canberra negotiating this public space or relationship between public and private is really almost lacking here. And they're talking about flexibility, open to public, a little bit of consideration and of the pets, etc. Then we have those that are, we've called this group as working young adults that are very much career focused. They were really interested about the place where they're located and how they connect to the city, which is quite interesting. They were interested in design of where they live. as well as their neighbors. And then the last group here is the group with younger adults with kids, and they're very much interested in safety, mental health, again, talking about ground floor, passive surveillance, etc. So it's really kind of confirming of what we're talking about. These are just some snapshots in terms of quotes, just to give you the feel of what we've heard from the community. And of course, the 21 people is quite low, but still it gives us confidence to keep going and exploring this. So we heard different things from those being very satisfied with where they live and how they integrate in a community, to those that feel like this, very trapped, feel like living in a cage at the moment. And it's, as this person says, you just enter in your building, you just enter in your home, and that's it. You have four walls, which is really sad in 21st century. And then we also looked at, of course, density became quite important when we asked about, do you know your neighbors? And these are some of the, if you haven't been to one of these places, these are very common corridor spaces that we see in those apartment buildings. And what they commented, especially in a bigger, denser spaces, they were talking about the fact that it's a big building. They cannot know everyone. A lot of people live there, so they don't actually know who belongs to which apartment, etc. You see people in the elevator hallway, but you don't really know them. Or this one, which is quite funny as well. They told us that sometimes it can be very awkward when you meet someone in the elevator and then you realize that you're walking to the same direction, and then you're wondering, oh, is this person actually following me, or are they actually my neighbor? And then you realize that you're unlocking doors next to each other, which is quite awkward, but also could be funny. Or this is the one that talks about the fact that the space maybe doesn't even contribute that much to social sustainability, because the person living in this space, the building doesn't really have any communal space. And yet there is a lady that lives next door, and she's probably in her 60s, and she organizes all these Christmas parties, and people come together and meet each other. And so they started to create this sense of community, even though they were just meeting at the ground level in front of their building for this party. But also sometimes it is about space, and some people were referring to the function of the spaces which they have as communal spaces, or that are defined as communal spaces, like gyms, for example. And usually people just go there to exercise. They're not there to socialize, and they don't like that. Or even elevators. There are these opportunities to exchange a few words, but often people feel awkward in those spaces, or they're in a rush to go to work, etc. But there are also these spaces like pools, for example, where people really enjoy meeting each other and chit-chatting with others. And there are those, when we asked about what kind of community actually matters to you, especially those with young children, they were talking about community. And one of our interviewees actually mentioned that they don't want to move from this place because they have a really strong community and they rely on that community. And they said, I really, everything that I love about our complex are the neighbors, and especially neighbors that also have kids. And they're really good with really good friends with quite a neighbors, and they know each other, but they also have a lot of confidence. My daughter would catch the bus from school, and she's there in the afternoon when I'm at work, and I know there's people around. There are always safe places for her to go if she's, for some reason, she can't get hold of her or something. So these kind of things are quite important. And then they were talking about this solidarity as well. It's nice when people look out for each other. So one person was telling us that they were broken into their apartment, and their neighbors actually helped a lot at that time. And also, it's not about being friends with people, but it's actually supporting each other, which people recognize as a really important value in all this. So after all these conversations, we actually ended up with 14 categories, and all these 14 categories have subcategories of things that we're looking at. Some of these categories were just reinforced through literature, but also some of these are very new and quite contextual to Canberra, which are, for example, building management and supervision. That's the category that we added, which came from our interviews, and the need for having building management or strata helping us develop that social connectedness, as well as innovation and technological integration, etc. And then a number of subcategories that are added to our categories. So just to give you an illustration in terms of, so for example, this is our category 2, indoor spaces, and it actually has 13 subcategories, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but some of those that came in were related to the interviews that we have. For example, offering plans for small units, including studios and one-bedroom apartments that can accommodate a reasonable number of guests. Some people actually were saying that their social connectedness was really affected because they're living in a really small apartments, and they cannot afford for their family to visit and stay, or their friends who are especially interstate, etc. So really, so thinking about flexibility became really important. And these are some of the illustrations that we actually started working with. Paulo Sembrano, one of our ex-students, who's helping with this project as well. And these are just starting to explore some of those design opportunities, and how do we actually visualize, and how do we start thinking about measuring all these categories that we've identified. And this is, for example, an illustration of a typical corridor that you seen earlier, and how that could actually grow and become a multifunctional space that can change depending on what's needed, or even incorporating, because nowadays a lot of people are working from home, thinking about how we can incorporate working from home as well, etc. So, and also this is illustration of the ground level, how that ground level is not just an entrance where you leave your packages, because a lot of people actually talked about that ground floor and how that's lacking a lot of design there. Or even just some of these kind of experimentations with all these things our colleagues from architecture would all know. We all know all these things, but they're just not part of the neoliberal housing that we're experiencing here. So all the flexibility that we can see within these tiny apartments, if we do have a studio apartment, how can that be transformed to incorporate a bedroom if we need that? or changing into a different kind of room and moving some parts of the furniture really easily, or kitchen, etc. So thinking about those aspects. This is just to give you an idea of building management, or the famous strata that we have here, and what kind of roles we've distilled from all these conversations that we had with people living. So one thing was to actually have this ongoing monitoring and reporting. So giving a bit more role to strata, and continuous planning by the management body in terms of engaging activities like outdoor exercises, fundraising, community talks, adequate timely testing and maintenance of these shared facilities, which kind of they already do. Now, in the third phase, we're actually asking practitioners, people who are involved in planning and designing some of these spaces, to rate and also tell us what they think in terms of importance of these factors. So still at the moment, we're looking at all these factors quite flat, without intersections. I think that's our next challenge. And these are some of those: security and safety. Again, really interestingly, passive surveillance, as we all know, comes to mind as an important one. Safe playing areas. I'm just going to fly through some of these. This is indoor built environment spaces. Communal spaces, having views became a really important one, because a lot of those communal spaces are just leftover spaces that normally they cannot sell as apartments, so they leave them as communal spaces. So a lot more consideration about those spaces. Quality of materials, of craftsmanship, of course, and multi-generational households as well. Outdoor, again, nature integrated shared recreation rather than just simple recreation spaces, as we all know. And again, incorporating some of the mixed use and views as well. Energy sustainability. As you can see, what also is really interesting is that pretty much they're almost equally rated as well. Cleanliness, as we know, of all these spaces, very important. Building management and supervision, we talked about that. Innovation and technological integration was a little bit less important, but maybe that's the bias because we actually asked architects to look at this. And then First Nations and other cultural inclusiveness, which was also quite interesting. Identity and heritage. And this is also something that is almost forgotten, because a lot of these new developments are not really integrated into the existing neighborhoods. They're all islands, and we know like Canberra's really good at making islands. So thinking about how all these new developments, especially higher density developments, can be integrated into the neighborhood where they're emerging, rather than being a silo or an island. Very important. So that's our historically grounded community identity. Health and well-being, climate responsive indoor spaces, so all quite highly rated. Privacy and density and population, very important. Balanced density for livable communities. We can't really claim that as a finding, but there is a nice threshold in terms of number of people living in particular development and how well communities integrated as well, or organized. So that's at least our observation is that those that are living in lower density actually have a lot more organized community compared to those living in those high-rise buildings, which is quite interesting. But we can also resolve some of those things with design as well. And this is the general rating. As we can see, most of the categories pretty much very similar rating that we're seeing. Probably the highest density and population, accessibility and location, and the lowest innovation and technological integration. So the next stages, or in progress development, as we've talked about all these different stages, we're also talking about this as a rating system that is not, and again, if we do follow this whole neoliberal system, and I guess the only way is to play along and add another rating system, that's another discussion for another time. But even if we do get this rating system going, what we're thinking is to have different stages of how the project could be rated. Pre-design consideration, where a lot of input could be done in terms of how that rating could be improved. Design evaluation, when they're performing, and then keep going and monitoring periodically. So not doing a rating and then forget about it, but actually ongoing monitoring becomes really important. And Rom, you can interrupt if you want to add anything.
No, so we looked at a couple of existing rating systems and mechanics of them, and also how a rating system and framework for it can be as efficient as possible and effective. So this is what we are thinking at the moment. And then in the next phase, we are going to have, if you go to the, we are already there. We are going to have a sort of table discussion with practitioners that this is what we are thinking, how we can develop it. And then we would have a web page so we can have like a pilot test of the rating system. And then we would get feedback, we would refine it. And finally, after that test, we're gonna again refine it, and we're gonna have the rating system.
But the idea is also looking into these categories, how we can actually measure some of those things, because they're all interdependent really and interconnected, which is quite a nice challenge that we don't really have answer to yet. And maybe we never will, but we're still searching.
And another outcome that we are looking at is sort of proposing a design guide, specifically for Canberra maybe. So this is also a work in progress. So those illustrations is based on the current findings, and maybe in the next stages, we're gonna produce more relevant and more explicit in relation to the outcomes of this research.
So conscious that we do need to finish and maybe get some questions or feedback. We have a lot of people to thank to in this project, and thank you for joining us. We know week 13 is not an ideal time, so thanks again.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, thanks, guys. I'm going to open the floor up for comments or questions. I'll preface it with two comments, and one is that you're being Zoomed live, and also we're recording. So if you speak, you're consenting to your voice being engraved for the future. Anyone like? Oh, Mike?
Thanks, Ram. Thanks, Melissa, and to your colleague, Suzanne, for the work to date. So fantastic, as we talked about earlier before the kickoff, I think space or gap for this kind of research, and thinking about next steps and opportunities. I think when you move to the conversations or table, I think you mentioned at the end, Melissa, table discussions definitely include agencies. So I think those who might be on the side of council or state or territory agencies, I'm sure they'd be more than happy here in the ACT to contribute. to the conversations. And I think those who've have had experience in from a governance or regulatory perspective, how they might function pre-DAs, post-DAs. I think so. That's a suggestion on the tabling. And then I think on your second or third to last slide, Milica, that you were talking about the staggering. I think really interesting. I think not having really thought about the question you're asking and its application, but I think that staggered structure makes a lot of sense. You know, pre-DA, BA. So I'm thinking about the development stages for those in the audience: development approval, building approval, and then post-occupancy or ongoing. So that's, I guess, third comment. I think the post-occupancy, like getting the strata managers or the company managers, depending on the governance structure, is really clever as well. I hadn't thought about that, but I also haven't been involved in this space. So yeah, a couple of suggestions.
Thanks.
No, thanks.
It's quite, I think we're starting to understand how complex it is or how big it can be, and we'd love to think about next stages in involving more people as well in collaborating. And yes, definitely agencies, government.
We have had a couple of practitioners working in different government bodies and particular planning bodies. But definitely we need more.
We need PR on this project.
We need money. So if we have like better incentives, that would be really effective as well. Yeah, that's great.
John.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Milica and Rom. That's a fascinating study. I think what I was really interested in is when you were talking about the different sort of possible plan layouts for apartments, and your examples of studio apartments, how they could actually be configured and used in different ways to promote this idea of social sustainability. So what about I suppose the bigger ones, like the 2 bedrooms, the 1, 2, 3 bedroom apartments, or does that actually come in to your study? Because I think one of the problems is, as you probably know, is that the division of types of apartments within those blocks does make a big difference. So if you only have one studio apartments and 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom apartments, then you're going to get it's going to skew your sample type, I suppose, because you're not going to get a lot of large or families with all the kids and so on and so forth. So just wondering if you had some reflection in terms of not just the common areas but the apartment layouts themselves.
Yeah, that's definitely in our radar, and also in the literature we did, and also in the interview that came out. So that was just an illustration, and we have like a large number of illustrations, but for the sake of this presentation, we showed one. And as you know, these are not new things. Like even if you go to 19th century, people, they were talking about plan flexibility, and when you look at the early work of modern movement, in terms of housing, they proposed so many interesting things as well. So there would be a mention to those prototypes as well, but definitely we would consider that as well.
But it's also fascinating that even like as Ron says, like the design of apartments didn't really change. I think it got even worse and worse with these silos, and we don't really have the flexibility of different types. And one of the problems that we know is that we don't get to have diversity just because of the apartment layout as well. So we know that around 5% of those apartments, or maybe less, are 3 bedroom. And they're so rigid in the typology. If we can think about less rigid typologies and more flexibility, I think this is really, and that goes back to this multi-generational living as well. And just so definitely something to think about.
Yeah, and also, as I said, considering this great body of literature that we have just on flexibility of unit plans. Why we don't see it in actual projects. It's complex, right? We can talk about yeah, it's more about education of graduates. There's so many things around this problem as well. Yeah. Come on, Adam, give it the answer.
Because I've delivered literally thousands of units, like from the early design stages.
Yeah.
And it's economics.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
At the end of the day, the property is the largest thing people are going to buy,
Yeah.
or it's an investor. And it's not about spatial qualities. It's about a list of features and amenities next to a big dollar sum and a 30-year commitment.
But I kind of agree, but also disagree. I think if community is educated, they'll know what they're buying.
But
and
they
they're
won't be able
not-
to afford it. Because the market is very, very efficient at delivering at certain price points.
That's true, but I think it's the role of architects to compromise between what client wants and creativity, right? Because that was the whole discussion of Le Corbusier as well, like how you should approach the client, how you should make that compromise. And I think going back to
I
the
agree with
knowledge
you.
of graduates as well, which I'm directly blaming maybe some of us.
I agree with you, but you're fighting a system that we're not part of, which is the building of expectations by some people who are experts at that, called real estate agents, and they're backed up by the financiers, and the developers aren't interested because their risk and their goal and their success criteria for development have absolutely nothing to do with what it is material or spatially. It's how it equates. And so until you, like the examples you cite in Canberra that were successful, aren't strata speculative residential developments.
Yeah.
And so, that governance model is a thing.
Yeah. But it's also our fault, Adam. As architects, we're really happy at being in our own bubble and just chit-chatting with ourselves.
I just don't agree, because I think I've been on the side where you fight and you fight and you fight, and then you lose the client.
But that can be a solution, like proposing a sort of rating system that would force everybody to think about those things. Because, at the end of the day, their products would measure against that. They would maybe push clients to also think about the incorporation of those ideas.
I think, apologies, I missed the first 10 minutes,
that's all right.
but in a way, it seems that there's some pretty easy pickings when you pick on these projects. But I think there are some good examples of disruption in the housing industry at the moment, which, we look at the peer-to-peer delivery model of Nightingale that Jeremy McLeod's running down in Victoria, which of course riffs on the Bau Group and stuff from Berlin, which Milica, you'd obviously be very familiar with. And then there's also, I guess, a slight disruption in the branding where I guess it's true that this neoliberal speculative development model is already being disrupted by the real estate and the cultural engines itself. Thinking of Andrew Hoyne and Hoyne, which do placemaking within a lot of Sydney and Melbourne projects. So I guess, not just to add policymakers and people like that to the next round of discussion, but I think it'd be really, really important to go there, because it's clear that, Adam's critique of the economy of housing is ruthless, and it doesn't care what happens after the point of sale. And actually your entire study is all about beyond point of sale and building community. So I think it'd be worthwhile including those people in your conversation. And I think that's also where architects are. I mean, don't forget Jeremy is an architect. It's a not-for-profit, so it's not even his company, of course, but it is a way where architects are showing leadership. And I think what I really respect about what Jeremy's doing is that, unlike the architects you're interviewing, you'll notice that there's a massive concentration of red in every single category. And that, I think, is the problem of the architect, is that we have an inability to pick through and choose the right battle. And I think that's probably more what Adam's talking about.
Just before I forget, I think it'd be really interesting to look at this social isolation and survey suburban people in Canberra, because I think you could overlay that and say, okay, there's a common contemporary like Canberra issue, and that might help just redistribute some of those intensities. But I also, if I just reflect on my own experience, who've lived in kind of high density stuff in several places, it's not about shared space, it's about shared experience.
Yeah.
There's nothing like an emergency services vehicle, whether it's fire, ambulance, or police. I got the the event where I met most of my neighbors was a SWAT raid where someone had called in some terrible thing was going to happen, and they just emptied out the entire building with SWAT. But you know, Brisbane floods was another example where you all of a sudden met your neighbors. And I think, you know, it's that's your 60-year-old lady, that's your little kid, because they don't know the social boundaries. So the shared experiences of the kid falling over or saying something funny in the lift.
Yeah.
And so thinking, you know, a critique of that as opposed to, because I think as architects, we always, it's our, in our wheelhouse, like we turn everything into a spatial problem, but more space is not something we could afford with affordability crisis and everything else. And so thinking about how things work and interact, maybe.
Yeah.
Can I ask you guys a quick one? I found it really interesting with the work from home provisions to try and think about how to use the space to, you know, make that a less ghastly experience. What about study from home? Is there, you know, ways that can be improved too, so that it's less of an isolating person stuck in the same room they sleep in, you know, studying and so on?
Yeah, I think there's also a great level of literature for that one as well.
We also had that heard in the interviews with some of those studying at the university, and they were saying how, oh, they would love to have, instead of this whole space that they have as a communal space, to actually have a space to study. So yes, we've heard those kind of comments, or even having a library or having access to a better internet, or yes, so we've heard,
COVID made a big change in the way people think about you know, their spaces. Like when we interviewed some of them that they have been living in those residences for more than 5 or 6 years, their experience after COVID is really interesting, and in relation to a study, working and fully working from home. So definitely we would also acknowledge those things in the next phase as well. Yeah.
Not that we want them to work from home, we want them to work here.
Yeah, don't.
You maybe covered this at the beginning, but one of the key things I think is the turnover. So the number of sales, did you collect data on that?
The number of sales, we do have some data on those things.
So the ones that have lived there for 1, 2, 5, 10 years.
Yes.
I'm just thinking that the strata, having moved now and being involved with strata, I think there really is a larger part that strata could play, also with the developer. So how can the strata and the developer come together to provide a different product? I mean, there are continual whinges around town of people that have moved into strata developments, and how it's managed, and how body corporates sometimes just can't get it together and they have to hand back to the strata management. There's a whole lot of sort of generational change. So the downsizers that are not going into retirement villages, they want to stay in place. And again, the thing that I'm hearing is the strata title whinge. So I don't know how that can be done, but I'd also agree that you also need key people to organise things like the Christmas parties, or the the fire alarm goes off and everybody's out on the street, or the place next door is auctioned and everybody comes out to see what it's worth. I think, again, how do you engage? You know, how does this come into the spatial quality of the place? And I think, you know, if you want to have Christmas parties or just an annual celebration, you have to have space on the property.
Shut the lifts down, give everyone something to whinge about, and you'll make all these social connections that we'll enjoy. You know, get rid of, I mean, I think strata, body corporate management, get rid of them. If you own a place, you have to be on the committee, and you have to have an argy-bargy with your neighbors, and you form sides and you form social cohesion. Yeah, I don't know. So the more dysfunctional the design maybe is kind of the way to go.
Maybe.
You reminded me of when I lived in the Soviet Union, because the lifts didn't work and we talked about it.
Yeah. That's how you get your neighbors.
Okay, please join me in thanking our presenters.
Thanks,